Okay, not many people actually know about this, so I'm just going to tell you straight out. And to just, just accept what I say. There isn't that many people around who understand the story of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Most people think it's about a rich guy who learns how to become charitable, or they think it's a fun story with some ghosts in it, okay? Or they think, well, there's some morality there, and that's quite nice, but that's about them, it's not about me. Well, it's not about you, and nor is it about them either. There's much more complexity to the story of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol than you might possibly think on the outset. And where it gets really complex is when you start to really look at the actual details, what's going on in the story, and what the character represents. Now, I'm telling you that the character of Scrooge is a anthropomorphic personification, if I've said that right, for the evolution of human society. Okay? He's not a rich person. He's not just an old guy who's reflecting upon his life and thinking, well, what's going on here? Okay, he is an anthropomorphic personification of human societies. If you think about it like this, human society started off as tribal or little villages. They would hunt together, gather together, sing songs around a campfire together, do things together. And then, hey presto, time passed, and eventually there was commerce, and then there were cities developed, and things got a bit complicated. I don't know whether you know this, but the actual sin of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible was not necessarily sodomy, but was in fact the fact that Sodom and Gomorrah were the first big cities in the area, and within the city environments people got more selfish. So there were the people from the outside who were still nomadic, who were still living that Bronze Age, kind of like traveling society, people hunting together, traveling together, trading together, and being a community, as opposed to being in the individualistic, selfish, corrupt, corporate environment, which was the city environment, okay? So we're talking about the evolution of society, and within the life of Scrooge, we see that his girlfriend or possible future wife says to him, when we were young, we were poor and happy to be so. So she liked him when he was in that kind of mentality of being in the tribe, being together, playing together, singing together, whatever it was they did together, okay? But then the character of Scrooge, for some reason, starts to get interested in money and making money, and she says, you've got another love in your life, which I think is quite an interesting way of expressing it. Another focus of attention, another personal god, if you like. He ends up revering profit. Now, the character of Scrooge himself, the way it's written in the story, was, he has separation from his family. Maybe he was a bit traumatized in some respects. It's not necessarily overtly expressed 100% within the story, within the Ghost of Christmas Past part of the story itself. But on the other hand, I think we can probably extrapolate from what we see there of him having spent time away from his family that, he had separation and he was looking for some form of relation or relationship with something, and his girlfriend did satisfy that, but he was afraid of poverty and destitution, and so he became greedy as a way of dealing with it, or as a way of coping with it. Okay, so his character, bam, he develops a few cracks, and so has society. If you think about it, because society itself has moved into a perpetual global city-state now, all right, with lots of issues and lots of problems going on. It's pretty close to that. I don't know if it's 100%. Well, no, it isn't 100%. There are still some, traveling communities and tribal communities around. So, okay, you got this character of Scrooge. He gets interested in money. He gets interested in becoming more selfish and becoming better at it as well. One thing that I find really rather interesting about the story is way back at the beginning of the story, we see an image, or a scene, so to speak, of Scrooge at the funeral of Marley. Okay, and he's making a pledge. He's making an oath that the business that he founded with Marley will prosper. So then that kind of re-echoes into what his girlfriend in the early stages of his life, but later in the story when the Ghost of Christmas Past is talking about it, or showing him it, that he had a love in his life. All right, a form of love in his life, and that had become just the business. One could assume that the way in which Charles Dickens has written it is that Scrooge had lost a love in Marley when Marley died. Alright, are you with me? Because Marley would have been someone who he would have been with through every working day, working late most of the day with Marley, or when he wasn't going about like claiming money off other people. And so therefore there was some kind of like almost emotional attachment that he would have felt with Marley. Another clue to this is the fact that the first ghost that Charles Dickens has written into the story, which Scrooge sees, is the spirit of Marley. Now, why would that be? Okay, I mean, if someone was, I mean, if I was Scrooge, okay, and the spirit world had decided that I had, done tons of things that were wrong, and I had to be taken through this tremendous journey, wouldn't like my first girlfriend be a better choice than someone I've been working with who had died? All right, someone I actually had an emotional connection or emotional bond with, a lover. A potential wife, someone who I'd loved and lost, someone who had, gone on to the other side as a result of whatever. I don't know. Wouldn't that be a better choice? So why did Charles Dickens write the character of Marley as being the first ghost? Because it's 7 years after he dies that Scrooge sees Marley. Why? Scrooge is missing Marley at this point, and Scrooge himself is almost like perceiving the business that he's built with Marley as being a representation of what Marley was to him. Okay, maybe he's reenacting in his mind's eye the various business deals and the skills which he had learnt when working with Marley and learning from Marley. Alright, maybe he was imagining that in his head when he was alone by, in this place was only illuminated by one candle and the glow of a rather pathetic little coal fire. In the 7 winters up to the time when he has this visitation. So he actually was craving connection. He was craving something to be connected to. If he'd had lots of time separated from his family when he was young, when we're talking about him as a character and as a person and not as an analogy for society, then it would make some sense that he was missing emotional connection, and he was missing an emotional bond, and he'd learned to be without that and to create other personal higher powers or personal images which was important to him and which was not connected to society, because maybe he felt that society had treated him badly, and so he was then almost like attacking society through his work. There's lots of little ways in which we can interpret how his character developed. But he had to learn through his Ghost of Christmas Present experience that his actions could actually do other people some good, and he could even save a life. One of the key scenes that I like from this, I'm still calling it a scene because it was written in this theatrical style, was when he travels with the Ghost of Christmas Present to see, was it Bob Cratchit, the Cratchit family, and he sees Cratchit giving a toast to him, to Scrooge. Alright? So he's being shown that it is possible to have gratitude if you've got very little and your son is sick and dying and the only thing you can feed your family with is something really tiny and pathetic that won't fill up anyone's belly. That there can still be gratitude. This is obviously a revelation to him, because the character of Scrooge is traumatized, and I think our society is very traumatized as well, because we're now in a position whereby even more today, people are afraid of destitution and poverty and the rest of that, and there is much more of a selfish attitude towards life and possessions and status and all this kind of stuff. So what Charles Dickens is trying to do from my point of view is to point out to us that even when things aren't good, we can still develop some kind of positive gratitude for something. And maybe that's kind of like a bringing back of some of the positive tribal attitudes that we used to have a long time ago when we were like in tiny little villages and traveling communities, and that's all we had. You know, we had each other, and it wasn't the whole like city-state mentality of like care for your property, care for your money, care for your business, care for yourself and maybe your family and maybe one or two friends, and that's it. You know, that's where you stop. Okay. It really is a very complicated story. I mean, the Ghost of Christmas Present, which wasn't just the present of when Charles Dickens was writing, it is something which is always with us. Towards the the end of the story of the Ghost of Christmas Present, who is being perceived as being a man who is withering and dying, he has under his cloak 2 demon children, okay, and one of which is called Ignorance, and the other of which is called Want. Okay. I'm living in a country now where 20% of the population, according to the UN, is in poverty. And there's 14 million people who are destitute. Okay. And we got so much ignorance out there which is being peddled by people who have their own vested interests. Alright, deliberately to keep people ignorant. You know, we've got ignorance, we got want right now. So it was the Ghost of Christmas Present that Charles Dickens gave us these particular anthropomorphic personifications. Okay, the present, okay, not the past. And it wasn't really mentioned in the future. Okay, that there wasn't that allusion, that reference made in the Ghost of Christmas Future scenes. But what the Ghost of Christmas Future shows the character of Scrooge in the writing is that he had a delusionment. His focus on the profit motive led him to believe that there were associates and friends and contacts he had in the stock exchange who, he could kind of like rely upon. I mean, in that scene, I think it was a Patrick Stewart version that was on TV a few years ago. Patrick Stewart portrays his excitement at seeing the stock exchange, the place where he really feels at home. But what he learns from that scene, I think, that was the Ghost of Christmas Future scene, I think. I could have got that wrong. Was the people who he'd associated with did not see him the way in which he thought they would. Okay? And they were only interested for what they could get from the funeral, namely a nice big dinner or whatever it was. Right? They were users. They were out for themselves. They weren't people Scrooge could rely upon. And that speaks to us today. Maybe about our colleagues at work, the people we're in business with, and so on and so forth. Alright? Because we always have, within our society, we're trained to have great social skills with people we're trading with or in business with, and people are our customers and suppliers and our supply chains and all that kind of stuff. And those we're in the office with and all this kind of thing. But it's, it is an illusion which Scrooge fell for. And it's the fact he fell for it, alright, which explains that his character was quite so sad and quite so delusional. And that's also talking about us right now. Okay, because if we think that our colleagues and our contacts could be relied upon, when like push comes to shove and everything gets really difficult in our life, we've really got to question as to whether that's actually accurate and reliable and true. Okay, when it isn't necessarily. And then we got the scenes as the story carries on growing and developing, of all the people who were like, stealing the curtains off his bed or the shirt off his back when he was like dead and about to be buried. Because the only way that people could see, let's say, our society in the future would be what they could take from what's left over, the detritus, the debris. And the Ghost of Christmas Future is kind of like pointing out to us how would future generations see our society today if we don't address the problems of ignorance and want, if we don't address the problems, of hardship. And then of course there's the issue of paying people a fair wage. when we have the scene after Scrooge has seen the ghosts, all three of them, or four if you include Marley, and he's like reaching out of his bedroom window and he's throwing a coin down to a little boy. He's saying, "Go and buy the best turkey or goose or whatever it was from the shop." You know, he's employing someone. He's paying them a good wage for their labor. Do you see the parallel there? Okay, it's only through having a revelation that we can actually, like, you know, a revolution in society, that we can then pay people their, you know, the fair wage and make sure that they can look after themselves and all that kind of stuff. We don't have that these days. We got people who are working like more than 40 hours a week, who are on the breadline and are relying upon extra handouts and extra benefits. Okay. You know, within, I mean, there's various different characters within the story of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens who represent things which exist in our society today. I mean, Tiny Tim, who was a crippled kid in the story, he actually represents the disabled. He represents the disabled. So you've got a representation of those who need employment. You've got a representation of those who are disabled and in need of help and assistance so they can grow to a ripe old age and be happy and actually be relatively fulfilled. Alright? And the allusion, the reference within the story is that if you don't provide, you know, adequate provisions, both social as well as through the world of work, then those who are most deliberately needy now, right, in the here and now, could be dead very soon. And essentially it'll be you who'll be responsible. You as a society will be responsible. Okay, so this isn't about a greedy man. The greedy man is our society. It is England. It is the United Kingdom. It is United States of America. It is planet Earth. It's all of us together who are, through not taking right political action, not thinking about how we deploy our votes, not thinking about how we write our letters to our MPs and our political representatives, and participating in things socially on a political level, how we are all kind of like complicit in the development of evil. All right, the character of Scrooge is an old man. Why is he an old man? Because human society is old now. All right, we've had like technological progress. We've had the ability to build things, invent microchips, all this kind of stuff. We're an old man. The whole of society is an old man now. And now we've got to think about what we're going to do for the future. Because if we look at like the evolution and development of society now, it's kind of like we haven't had the visitation from Marley. All right, you know, we as a society are not there yet. But we can make it, you know, ourselves through doing something. Alright? Remember that Scrooge is not just a miserly old man who's running a dodgy little money lending business. He's not you. He's not me. He's not that multimillionaire living down the road. Okay? He is human society. And we have to think about how we're changing things. I mean, one of the other scenes that we see after Scrooge has seen the third ghost, he's woken up and he's light as a feather and all that kind of stuff, is he actually finds himself going to church, which is interesting because then he's actually participating with people in society. He goes and joins a party on Christmas Day with his family. So that's talking about being a society which engages with other people in society and engages with family and friends and community, as opposed to just like being very insular and only caring for your own and your tiny little, you know, race, creed, culture, or whatever, your tiny little family units or your tiny little whatever. Okay, it's reaching out beyond that. It's a very interesting literary device, the way that Charles Dickens has written it. Because going back to when he was young, when he was a young man, okay, he had a love in his life. It was his woman. He was going to get married and so on and so forth. She says, you have another love in your life, which is money. But yet, after the visitation of the ghosts, he goes to church, he goes to his family party, and he's actually trying to engage. So in this case, the church is being a representation of a different sense of higher power, a different sense of love, a different thing to love. Okay, not necessarily, it's not a Christian story specifically. Okay, it is using the church, which was relevant more within the culture in that time, but it's not just talking about the church and Jesus and all that kind of stuff. It's talking about having another conceptualization of love and a personal vision as to what is really important in life. A change of perspective, an altered attitude. Okay? And therefore, this is another reason why it's a love story. Because instead of loving his woman, or loving money, loving Marley, or loving the business he built with Marley, that was a kind of like a representation of what Marley meant to him, he had learned to love something abstract, something which was not quite so simple. And in some respects, we could even say that the revelations he has when he's seen the three ghosts is about him dealing with his issues, which made him that bad in the first place. Are you with me? Okay. Because young person, isolated, all that kind of stuff, lacking connection, finding things to get connected with, got connected with a woman, could have become his wife, but he had another love in his life, namely money and commerce and the rest of that. Just like our society, with the invention of money as opposed to barter, and everyone getting even more selfish, and then of course the invention of readily available credit and all that kind of stuff, making us even more obsessed with money and image and all that kind of like fucked up shit. Okay, and it's like Charles is saying that like we are reaching a time when we have to start loving something else. We have to start loving paying people what they're worth for their work. The little kid with the sled who goes and gets the goose for him. Caring for the disabled, caring for the homeless and all this kind of stuff. We have to reach this time, and dealing with the issues of ignorance and want. All right. We are living in the world of the Ghost of Christmas Present in lots of ways. Okay, because we've got all these problems around us, and we get distracted away from them because we're all selfish city dwellers. Now, at the very end, once he's had his revelation, it is expressed as though Scrooge has become a nice guy, and everyone loves him, and he's the most jolly person in the world, and all that kind of stuff, okay? And he's wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, and he's understanding that one can actually relate to one's fellow man. That's not just talking about connecting with your society. That is other people perceiving him in a different light. Now, if I'm right, which I strongly suspect I am, and Scrooge is a representation of our society, who is going to perceive our society apart from future generations? So the rest of the community that he comes across are a representation, in some respects, of future generations, and them looking back favourably at us